Welcome back. A few years ago, my team and I were working with a large insurance company that was experiencing a high volume of fraudulent claims. They had tried everything to stop the fraudsters, but nothing seemed to work. The claims adjusters were spending more time investigating potential fraud than actually processing legitimate claims, and the fraudsters were getting more sophisticated each year. I spoke with the senior management of the insurance company, and they told me that they had considered hiring fraud investigators to sift through the claims and patterns in the claims data that indicated fraud. These new hires were able to spot fraudsters who were trying to hide their activities by layering multiple small claims to stay under the radar. This approach has saved the insurance company millions of dollars and prevented countless policyholders from being victimized by fraudsters. We also developed a scoring system that automatically flags suspicious claims for further review. Well, sometimes people don't think outside the box because they're focused on the details. They were all busy chasing down leads and interviewing claimants. But this approach was not effective because fraudsters were one step ahead of them. By the time the insurance company received a fraudulent claim, the fraudster had already done their research and submitted the perfect set of documents to support their claim. This allowed the insurance company to catch fraudsters who were trying to hide their activities by layering multiple small claims to stay under the radar. However, we designed the system to minimize the number of false positives. In fact, I've seen this happen many times throughout my career. That is why it is so important to be open to new ideas and be willing to challenge the status quo. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that we never even considered. In other words, we wanted to reduce the number of times that legitimate claims were flagged as fraudulent so that the claims adjusters could focus on the actual fraud claims. For example, when you're in the forest, it's easy to get lost in the trees and miss the big picture. For example, I noticed that many of the claims were coming from the same zip codes. This meant that the fraudsters were likely living in these areas and using their local knowledge to submit legitimate-looking claims. I also noticed that many of the claims were for relatively small amounts, which indicated that the fraudsters were trying to avoid detection by staying under the radar. That is why it is helpful to have someone like me who can come in from an outside perspective and see the forest, but the cost of hiring and training fraud investigators was prohibitive. Wouldn't this scoring system flag these legitimate claims as fraudulent? To prevent this, we built in safeguards to ensure that legitimate claims were not flagged as fraudulent. For example, we took into account the age of the vehicle and the severity of the accident when evaluating claims for car repairs. We also worked with medical providers to develop guidelines for legitimate medical claims. I recommended that they hire a few people who were very good with computers, not necessarily fraud investigators, and train them on how to spot red flags in the claims data. I also suggested that they hire a few recent college graduates who had strong analytical skills, but lacked professional experience. I told them I would personally train the new hires on how to use data to detect fraud. Plus, it would take months before these new employees could start working. Time was of the essence, so I suggested they try something else. They agreed to give my approach a try, and within 3 months, we had trained 10 new employees who were able to spot subtle correlations. What is amazing is that almost all of the fraudsters had degrees in actuarial science or a related field. Many of them had even worked for the insurance company before realizing that they could make more money by submitting fraudulent claims. When we shared our findings with the insurance company, they were so excited that they quickly approved our recommendation to hire more people with computer and analytical skills. Today, this insurance company has a team of over 50 data detectives who proactively identify and stop fraud. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't the insurance company think of this themselves? When I first started working with this insurance company, they had over 300 employees working on fraud, but none of them were using data to detect fraud. The reason why my approach worked so well is because I was able to look at the data and identify patterns and trends that indicated fraud. By identifying these patterns, I was able to develop a scoring system that automatically flags suspicious claims. For further review, you might be thinking, what if someone simply gets unlucky and has multiple small claims for things like car repairs or medical expenses? Even with these safeguards in place, it's possible that some legitimate claims could be flagged as fraudulent. This is just one example of how a simple change in perspective can lead to a breakthrough solution. And if you want to learn more about how to think outside the box, stay tuned for more videos.